Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mark Burgess with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We also have Diana Robinson with Northern Illinois University joining us today for part of the presentation. We've invited all of our state and local board chairs and members, also the staff, our CEOs, and then those from all of our agency partners to try and clarify and get some feedback from everybody on a couple different things. One, and primarily the discussion will be on the one-stop certification process, but also we want to make sure that we answer any questions or get any feedback on the one-stop operator procurement as well. We're going to leave the phone lines open today, but we ask that you mute your phone unless you're ready to speak, to try and minimize the background noise that might come from otherwise. We know we're all busy and working at some of our desks, so that'll help out there. Diane and I will be presenting the majority of the information, but really this is a session to give you, and especially those involved in those two processes, an opportunity to ask us questions to clarify the policies that have been issued. We can give you some clarification of that. We also want to give some clarification that we received from the Department of Labor in a recent webinar they provided. And it's also an opportunity for us to ask you what's working well in your process and maybe what's not working so well. So really this is an interactive type discussion. We want to get some feedback from you, as I've said, but we do want to minimize some of that background noise if at all possible. If you haven't received the PowerPoint presentation yet, you can access it in the bottom left files pod where it mentions one-stop process. If you have any comments you want to make in the chat pod, certainly do so on the left-hand side of your screen. We will answer those as we feel appropriate as we proceed through this presentation. I don't anticipate it'll go an hour and a half, but certainly we're here for an hour and a half if we get enough feedback and comments and questions that we need to extend it that long. So with that, I will turn it over to Diana Robinson, who will present the majority of the information here on the one-stop certification process.
Great.
Good morning, Diana.
Good morning, Mark, and hello, everyone. We've got a pretty good turnout, so thanks to everyone for giving us part of your morning. Good cross-section of state and local workforce boards, so glad you could join us. I'm not very good at driving this kind of presentation yet, so I need to figure out how to change the slides.
You should be able down at the bottom, Diana. If you've got a couple arrows, just utilize the next arrow, the one on the right, from slide to slide.
I just messed up here.
You know what? We've got a few slides today. I'll go ahead and handle that for you, Diana.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it. I'll take some remedial Adobe Connect. So as Mark already mentioned, the purpose of this session this morning is really to circle back and make sure that you have all the information that you need to complete the certification process, which includes procurement of your one-stop operator. So this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions you have about the process itself and the application with the criteria and indicators. We had included a timeline in the policy as guidance for where you might try to be in order to meet the July 1st deadline. And then there's been a lot of information out lately, especially from the Department of Labor on the competitive procurement requirements, and Mark will be covering some of that. They're much more stringent than they've been in the past, and we want to make sure that you're all very aware of what these requirements are. As Mark also said, we're hoping that those of you who are moving down the path on this are willing to share with us what's worked well and where you've had some challenges or some hiccups. I'm sure everyone can learn from the experiences of our colleagues here. And then finally, we've mentioned this, and you'll probably hear it more than once, but the July 1st deadline is looming, so we just wanted to make sure that you're all aware that that is the deadline, and be prepared to make sure that all of your paperwork and other requirements have been fulfilled by then. All right, Mark, next one, please. So we think it's been a pretty resource-rich environment in the sense that there's been a lot of information pushed out. The feds have provided a number of webinars. The two most germane to today's conversation is both on the one-stop delivery system overview and a two-part series on the competitive selection of the one-stop operators. They've made their PowerPoints available, and they've gone over them quite thoroughly, so you should have those as resources and references. They also published a frequently asked questions document. I've got the URL up there. It has just 5 questions on it and answers, but for some of you, those may be useful information. And then, of course, here in Illinois, the WIOA partner agencies have put on several webinars related to one-stop certification, those having been recorded and available to you. And last week, I was privileged to participate in, or at least listen to the IWP's webinar that was hosted by Melanie Arthur on conflict of interest, which I think everyone is learning about and figuring out how to address the requirements. She is very knowledgeable, did her homework on that one, and I think will probably be a very useful source of guidance for both the directors as well as the state agencies. So we're hoping that we can build on the knowledge that she shared at that webinar. And then we here in Illinois are also in the process of preparing our own frequently asked questions, even if it's been only asked once. But we will use the Q&A that unfolds during this webinar, add that to the draft that's in process, and let you know when and where that's available. We'll try to get that up as quickly as possible. All right. We're going to turn this back to Mark to cover some of the key takeaways from the recent DOL webinar on competitive procurement.
All right, yeah, and unfortunately these ended up out of order and we didn't catch these, so we're actually jumping up to procurement before we get back to the certification process. But either way, we'll make sure we cover both those. And we thought it important that we share with you, and I'm sure some of you were able to join those webinars that are put on by ETA through their Workforce GPS website. They're all recorded, so if anyone feels they want to go back and review the information and discussion from those, certainly you can go to that Workforce GPS website and look for the recorded sessions and listen to them, similar to how we do it. But we thought we had 5 or 6 good takeaways from that session that we want to make sure all of our local boards and staff are aware of, as well as CEOs, and then as well as those that maybe be applying for those operator positions. One of those is, if you have a bid process out there, those costs that are going to be expended as part of being an operator, those are considered programmatic costs, not administrative costs. Now, that's a real key thing for our Title I folks, because we have a policy out there on the amount of expenditures that need to be put towards training, direct training expenditures. So we will be keeping that in our thoughts as we go forward and finalize that policy revisions to what's currently out there. But for everyone else, from your fiscal standpoint, you need to be aware that they're programmatic and they're not administrative costs. If during the bidding process, whether that be a request for proposal, an invitation for bid, or whatever acronym you guys use in the field, you want to make sure that the costs associated with those deliverables are in that bidding process. ETA, on more than one occasion during that presentation last week, made it clear that no information on costs within those processes means it's not a very good process. In fact, it restricts the bidding process. And so this is one indication of a time where you may have to go back and redo your process. And I know we're getting late in the game here with July 1 coming up rapidly, but again, it was clear from the federal standpoint that if your documents did not include any costs, you will have to go back and redo that process once again.
Mark, just a quick point of clarification. So in here, the costs really represent funding. So they need to have some sense of the financial resources available to respond to the RFP.
Correct. No, nobody should be bidding on something they don't have any idea what they're going to be have available to utilize, I guess, is the way to say that. And again, during this, if somebody has a question, you can place that in the chat pod. All of the telephone lines, unless you've muted yourself, are available. If you have a question as we go along, please stop us and ask that question at the time. We'll also have an opportunity at the end of the presentation for any other questions or comments. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one. If there are revisions, and I just mentioned one reason for a revision, if there are revisions necessary, they need to be made public once those revisions are made, but you also need to directly notify any solicitors. And I guess that the way they describe that is just in case they miss the public notification the second time around, since they've already applied once, we want to make sure they have an opportunity to apply with the revisions in mind, or choose not to apply, whichever the decision might be. So while it's primarily the same process for notification to the public, you have to have that one step of anyone that's already solicited, they get the information directly. And one of the other reasons that might create a revision or resubmission of the bidding process is if there are no bids or there are no qualified bids. You have to redo the process. We talked about this a little bit, I think, in our previous webinar back in January or whenever we had our first webinar on procurement, that said if there are no bids, nobody should assume they become the operator, whether that be a board or somebody at the local level. You have to bid. If you want to become that operator, you must bid accordingly based on the process that's been developed. So hopefully no one has any questions on that. If you've gone through that process and do not have any bids or qualified bids, you probably really need to review the process itself and figure out if there's something maybe missing in the process, something that's not clear, that might be swaying people not to bid, not to come in for that process and application, and see if there's things that you really need to revise to encourage solicitations. And as I said, we're a little bit out of order on these slides, so I'm going to send it back to Diana now for some key dates on the certification process, unless there's some questions at this time about the operator procurement process. Okay, Diana.
All right. Let's see. So, as I mentioned a little earlier, we have a calendar in the policy that we thought would be useful just to help you stay on track. And we pretty much back mapped from the July 1st deadline of having all of the certification applications in. So one of the first milestones was that the local workforce boards submit their notice of intent to apply. And that was not a mandated step to take. We just wanted to encourage you to do it so that Commerce had some, some idea of where you were in the process, and for those boards that needed the state to designate a team to visit, we also wanted some sense of how many of those teams would need to be fielded. So if you haven't yet submitted your notice, it's not too late. It's good just for us to have an inventory of who's on track. May 15th, which again is coming up quickly, is our suggested date for the one-stop operators to have completed, provided their information into this application for certification. The consensus being that you all are in the best position to know the kinds of resources that you have, as well as where potentially some of your improvement opportunities exist.
Yeah, Diana, it's Mark again, and before we go any further on this timeline, I just want to strengthen your message on the notice of intent. I think we've only received about half of those notices, maybe just a little bit over half of the 22 or 23 centers have sent those in. So if you have those and have not sent them in, please send those in to me. If you have not received those, please reach out to the individuals that should be sending those in to get those in. We feel like you really should have those in by now to indicate you're moving along in your process. Certainly, it's not out of the realm that you can still complete everything by July 1, but that's one of the simpler steps in this process that we hope everyone is able to get through here in the next few days if you haven't already completed it. And so if you need any assistance with what needs to be done to submit that notice of intent, reach out to me. We can get my email up here in a minute in the chat pod, or reach out to me by phone if you have that number, so that we can get these clarified and make sure we get these in as soon as possible. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. At the end of this month, we are suggesting that the initial center review be completed by the team, so that any items that could be corrected prior to finalizing the application can be addressed. Mid-June, we think by that time your one-stop operator procurement process should be completed and you have an operator designated. Around that same time, we would hope that your local review team would make its recommendation to your local board with respect to certification. The end of the month then in June is when each local workforce board would let the IWIB know of what its certification decision is, so that by July 1st, the designation letters can be sent out and a list of all certified one-stops in the state can be compiled. And we are hoping that and trusting that every center will be able to address its certification requirements. Before moving on, any questions about the suggested timeline here or comments?
Do we have anyone from the local boards or that have moved along in this process? I'd like to get some feedback from them on where they're at in the process. I know we had several people indicate they were from local boards. Is anyone developed their certification team already, have their individuals together that are going to be completing these certifications?
Yeah, this is Eric Christians with I'm with the board from Springfield, Illinois. I'm the chair. I have a team assembled. Actually, there's three of us so far. We had hoped to have a few more people, and I believe I'm saying this with all certainty that the operators have submitted their notice of intent to apply. So I think we're on track with everything so far. We just need to. I'm just waiting on this webinar and going to go over the whole program, kind of to look at what we need to review and what we need to inspect, and we're going to be discussing this tomorrow in one of our CEO meetings.
Excellent. We have received your notice, Eric, so that's great. And it looks like local area 2 up in McHenry County, they've completed, or at least getting their team together and meeting in the near future as well. So this is good to hear. Without having any feedback, we really weren't sure where anyone was at in this process. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a little concerning when we haven't got some of the notices of intent, but hopefully that's just a procedural matter, and those are not holding up the rest of the process as far as getting teams together and starting to understand what the certification process really will entail, because that's going to be the real meat that we have to get moving on. Anyone else with comments on that?
Yeah, we've got Pam Furlan is in the chat box. They have 3 members on their team and are looking for 1 more. We have a few more who are typing, so let's wait for just a minute and see how they're coming along. So
yeah, sorry, Diana. I would say as you get those teams together and start reviewing the policy, and especially the checklist for certification, as you run into concerns with that, maybe we won't have as many questions today simply because we don't have those teams looking at those criteria yet. But reach out to Diana or myself once you get to that point if you have any questions on what each of those might mean. Looks like another one's moving along on their team as well. This is great. This is good news, and happy to hear that several of the local areas and their boards have been moving along on this.
And once we get our Q&A sheet finalized out of as a result of this webinar, we'll be sure to keep it updated. So as you have questions and they're answered, we'll just add those to the list, and you can turn to that as possibly a source of information for you. Okay. All right, Mark, can we go to the next slide, please? So this is really a summary of what's currently in the Q&A that we've assembled, and I'm going to go very quickly through the topics just so you know what's in there. And if you want to have more detailed conversation this morning, we can certainly do that. There was one question around the notice of intent to apply, and that was just clarifying whether indeed it's the signature of the chief locally elected official that's required, as opposed to the WIB chair. And the answer is that is correct. It is the chief LEO, primarily because the LWIB chair would already be aware of the certification process, and that the locally elected official may not be until they're notified of the LWIB's decision. Then we had a few questions related to the actual certification process. One, just clarifying the deadline, which I think everyone knows that by now is July 1st. Another question had to do with clarifying, this is under the governance criteria early in the application, where one of the bases for determination is whether or not the methods of administration have been developed and implemented. And the question is, what would satisfy that requirement? And it's basically just an assurance that the MOA exists to address the compliance issues related to equal opportunity and non-discrimination. And that should be in place and overseen by your local equal opportunity officer.
Right, and to add to that, we know we have some other agencies that do some of, if not very similar, surveys of facilities and assurances of compliance with Section 188 in the Act and these methods of administration. And so, you know, it's really up to the local board that finalizes what the criteria and what those, you know, what they're looking for in order to meet each of the criterion. And I would say, you know, it would be up to them to better answer whether they want both surveys to be complete for certification or if they would accept one or the other, because they certainly might not be on the same time frame. Maybe those that we are familiar with at the Title 1B Workforce Services level, NREO officers may have completed one in the last 6 months, yet one from maybe Voc Rehab or some other agency isn't due for another year or two. You know, they obviously wouldn't want to wait, but they, you know, it is up to the local board to decide what they're looking for. But those are type of examples that would meet, in our minds, this criterion, that they've had those surveys done, anything serious has been corrected from what they've identified, or at least have a plan in place for correction in a reasonable amount of time.
Great, thanks, Mark. The next one is references under the professional staffing section in the application. There's language that references center staff, and the question was whether that means just the one-stop operator staff or all partner staff, and it's the latter. It's everyone from frontline career planners to managers of program and staff and all the partners. And then the website-related requirements, the question had to do with must each one-stop have its own website, or can it simply add information and documents to what's already on Illinois WorkNet? And the response is that the intent is to ensure that access to all the needed information and resources is available to potential customers outside of them physically visiting a site. So it's really you assessing how comprehensive and relevant the information that is available online is, and deciding what needs to be added where. And then the final section references some questions that DOL has, and we just summarize those up here. Mark already touched on the fact that an RFP or an invitation for bid must include a funding amount. The question about can a fiscal agent bid to become a one-stop operator, the answer is yes. Let's see, the next one is, may a fiscal agent and or local workforce development board staff both procure and bid on a one-stop operator contract? And the answer is no, due to conflict of interest. It's important that these functions have a firewall, and that's what prevents either one of those entities from pursuing both roles simultaneously. And then the final question has a very lengthy answer to it, and basically the individual was asking for clarification about the roles and functions of these various entities: the chief local elected official, the fiscal agent, the one-stop operator, and the local board. And they provided a very concise but thorough explanation of which each one of those are. So that's what we have to date, and we'll see what comes out of our conversation and update this and let you know where it will live on probably Illinois WorkNet.
Yeah, we've got a question going back to your dot point on website requirements. And the question is, what is the incentive for a job seeker to visit a one-stop center if they're all available on a website? And I think it would be impossible and against the act to try and think you can provide all your services on a website. There certainly are reasons to have somebody come into a one-stop. The website is a support to that. Certainly certain information can be put onto a website. Certain information can be gathered from a website. And as far as affiliate sites go, certainly that, assists certain of our programs from having to have staff in the facilities. However, the services still have to be available, and in a comprehensive site, a website would not, comply with that. So the incentive is that there's going to be on-site staff that can provide assistance to the customers. There'll be resource rooms that provide information that may not be available on a website. There's a whole litany of services available that can't be done through a website only. So I think the website provides information on WIOA, services available, and how they should contact the individuals from particular programs that might interest them or that they might need services from, and then directs them to the one-stop sites to get those services.
That's great. Thank you. Were there any other questions about the questions? Because I went through the content pretty quickly.
Yeah, and as Diana said, Illinois WorkNet is willing to assist local areas in helping either connect their website to Illinois WorkNet so that all of our local areas have a presence on Illinois WorkNet, or we know we have one, maybe two local areas that don't have websites currently, or maybe the website isn't accessible or doesn't have all of the information necessary, and Illinois WorkNet, again, will work with them to put that information on their site. In the interim, if they want to develop a website personal to their location down the road, or utilize WorkNet for their entire website. And they can contact either Jeannie Kitchens at Illinois WorkNet, Chelsea Jones, or myself, and we'll make the appropriate connection to get you in touch with the right person to make that happen.
Great. Any other questions or clarifications that are needed on these? Okay.
I think, next question is from Mary Beth, wanting to know if you list a specific funding amount for the one-stop operator, doesn't that also in turn limit the number of bidders? And I think it may, I understand what you're saying, it might limit, but if the limitation is because they don't think that funding amount is appropriate for the services, then maybe they're not the appropriate entity to apply. But again, DOL in their website made it clear that it is necessary to have that in your documentation in order to get proper bids.
It was more so about zero cost, not accepting zero cost.
Laura's reminded me that it's really as much about not accepting zero cost, obviously. And we can maybe touch on that a little later. Maybe we need to reach out to them to get a little more clarification. If someone needs some more information, we can certainly reach out to DOL and get that.
Presumably, it could also include a not-to-exceed amount, so that would allow the board to have some discretion in negotiating the amount.
Good point, Diana, yeah. And Pam's got another question before we move to the next slide.
So Pam is asking, she thought that the requirement was that you can't say there is no money or budget available as opposed to providing an amount, a specific amount.
Or it can be zero bid, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's clarifying it better, Pam. Thank you.
And there was from McHenry, question was said that all services are available on the site. Should it list services available? I believe it's, as Mark was saying, it's about being thorough in describing the information and resources available. So in that regard, yes, I would think a comprehensive list of services would be appropriate online. But then referring the person back to the one-stop center for the actual access to those services. We've got one more person is typing. Let's take that question and then we can move on. Mark, let's go to the next slide, please. I think that's, local review teams. Okay. So we actually covered this as folks were willing to share how their teams were coming along, and quite a few of you have got them either pulled together or well on their way. I guess the only question perhaps that we didn't ask you was what kinds of support can we provide to you at this point? For example, are there certain materials that you might find helpful in briefing the members of the review teams?
And Diane, I think we talked about it and some of the local boards in the last webinar, the members, chairs and CEOs that were involved in that webinar. We had indicated to them and still plan on doing this. We can certainly help prior to the July 1 due date, but after the July 1 due date to continue to touch on continuous improvement, we are going to be reaching out to everyone involved in these processes to see if there's anything they need to share with us and would like to share with us, whether they be best practices or hurdles in the process, so that we can refine it and make sure everyone else hears from the others, and whether we share that in a webinar later down the road or just documentation to clarify things they were looking for. In this go around, the criterion and the bases for compliance are fairly, or at least the bases are fairly broad, giving the local boards and CEOs a really, ability to define them themselves. But certainly going forward, if we can have a list of criterion that were acceptable, it would be great to share those. So be prepared, as this process unfolds further, for us to be reaching out to you to get your further input.
Very much so. We did have LaDonna clarified from Pam's earlier comment in the chat box. She said if the one-stop operator RFP didn't list the exact funding amount, but funds are available, then it's okay. So hopefully that adds to the understanding of that requirement. All right. I think the next slide, Mark, is back to your takeaways from, yep.
Thanks, Diana. And again, this is the one slide that got out of whack somehow in our developing this PowerPoint. But a couple other points that they made in that webinar last week is that the evaluation process should be developed prior to solicitation, so that you're not developing afterwards after you've seen some applications coming in and determining those criteria based on what you've seen. It really should be out there beforehand, so it's a fair review process once you start getting applications. Some things they say that you should be considering are, what are the factors and scoring procedures. They really talked about a scoring procedure, so that it's not just a guess between one or two applications on this one feels this way and this one looks that way. They really thought there should be some kind of a scoring system developed by that review team. You should have an assignment of reviewers and panelists ahead of time. The process for conducting the evaluation, when they're received, what are the steps you're going to take in order to make those reviews and make a decision ultimately on who you're going to select. Develop a competitive range, what is acceptable for, consideration. Certainly you may get an application that comes in that is not even, I don't want to say not worth considering, but has so many deficiencies that you would maybe exclude it right off the bat. And then finally, all of this process, all of the decisions being made should be documented, and then the final results as well. And especially those will all be helpful as you go forward with this in the next, round of operator procurement several years down the road. And then finally, they wanted to make sure that you had a clear understanding of who is authorized to enter into any and sign those legal binding agreements. You should know that ahead of time so that you're not scrambling at the end to find out, is this the right person? Can we accept this? And nobody's making a hasty decision on who should be the allowed person to make those signatures.
I have a comment.
Okay, and we've got one of our monitors here, so it's just a good resource for backup information.
I just know that here, when I've been involved in reviewing of proposals for some contracts and stuff, and one thing that we have to do, and I don't know if they mentioned it from the DOL, is I have to actually sign a conflict of interest statement. Yes. That, I know, I'm not a party to the people who have returned bids or anything like that. And yeah. So I don't know if that's a part of what they said to include in that too or not.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, and I don't know, Diana, if you have some insight or maybe somebody from the Illinois Workforce Partnership that participated in Melanie Arthur's presentation on conflicts of interest, but there's really, if you look from a broad perspective, DOL doesn't exclude people from bidding. However, when you look at the conflict of interest, some options become almost impossible to do because of the conflicts of interest that continue to exist. That you can't do this or you can't do that, whether it be now in the bidding process or later in certain operational functions. That, and we've even talked to Region 5 about that same thing, and they made it clear. He goes, you know what? How hard do you want to make this on yourselves? Certainly you don't want to say no to somebody if they're not, ineligible, but sometimes the work involved to comply with conflicts of interest might preclude them from really being a good option. Yeah. And so you should you should be considering that as you go forward and ensuring that whomever is selected, that's all been covered, and operationally things will be able to be handled appropriately.
I was thinking more from an evaluator standpoint, like the evaluator being, that they have to sign that conflict of interest, so.
And that would apply to our review teams as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, the local review teams as well, yes. So I don't know, Diana or anyone else, if you've got any information you want to add to the conflict of interest that you might have heard last week.
Yep. The only thing that I'll throw in is how important apparent conflict is in addition to a real conflict. So it essentially has the same weight and has to be avoided. So I know I had to cut out of the webinar a little bit early. Maybe someone who was able to listen for the entire session has something else to add. So my understanding is that Melanie was going to provide you all with like a policy template. Would that include something like a conflict of interest form that reviewers could sign? Like we've got a few folks typing in the chat box. So while there's a policy template, but there's, okay, so you're still reviewing it. Would that include a conflict of interest form? Okay, got it. Kathy is saying that we didn't ask for that type of conflict of interest statement. Okay, it doesn't. Well, maybe that's something that one of the workforce areas would take a whack at and be willing to share with everyone.
Diana, this is John Barr. We have a template that we've used at the state. We could probably make available, posted online as a resource as well.
Excellent. Well, we can perhaps add that to the Illinois WorkNet site with the one-stop certification policy?
Yeah, certainly we can do that on the e-policy portal as an attachment, or not an attachment, but a resource to policy.
That's great. So we'll add that and the Q&A document as well and let you know where that resides. So that was really all that we had to present to you. And as we said at the outset, the idea here is to provide a forum for you to ask any questions or make any comments that you care to make about the process to date and how we can help.
Chelsea's getting ready to post the link to the e-policy portal. And so when you go into that, you'll be able to find the certification or the procurement policies. And we'll post those resources in the appropriate place for those policies.
And it's up there now. That's great. So we will, as Mark offered, reach out to either Mark or myself or any of your technical assistance team members or agencies. We'll try to be a funnel to receive all of your questions to make sure that we can capture them and share the answers with everyone in the system as well.
Yeah, we've still got some comments coming in.
Yep.
While we're waiting on those, I want to go ahead and move on to the next slide, just to let everyone know that we are trying to get back into having more of these. I know today isn't Wednesday, but this was the date that worked best for all of us, especially trying to get board, both state and local level board members and CEOs to be able to participate. So we had it today. We do have another webinar set next week for WIOA eligibility for our customers, the Title 1B customers. We've reached out to all of our other agency partners, so if any of you are on the line and think you have some revisions to eligibility of customers under WIOA as either new guidance has come out. We know there's been several TEGLs have come out that have given us additional guidance, and we want to convey that to our partners and grantees. But if any other agency partners are on the line and feel like they'd like to join us in presenting information regarding your programmer customers as it relates to eligibility, please let us know. Also, if there's maybe some direct program services, we may have opportunity to talk a little bit about program services in that webinar as well. Early June, we don't have a firm date, although I think it's going to be June 7th. We want to have a talk about service locators. We've been asked to have a presentation on that, so I think June 7th will be the day for that, but we have not sent that out firmly. So look for notification in the next few weeks for that. And then at the end of June, we are going to have a discussion on equal opportunity and how you can be in compliance with the non-discrimination requirements. Section 188, for those of you familiar, when WIOA was issued, Section 188 specifically was not touched. There was no revisions made. However, it was indicated those revisions would be forthcoming, and those are actually out there now. So we need to look at what changes have occurred from WIA to WIOA. With regard to that, we'll have Miguel come in from our Equal Opportunity office here, and he will speak to changes in the methods of administration, compliance with these requirements. I think we may give an opportunity for any other agency partners that have compliance staff as well to speak on behalf of their programs. And then we're, as always looking for any ideas for future webinars. So please, if you have a thought that you think would be good for the masses, whether that be grantees, whether that be board members, CEOs, agencies, please send those to me. We'll put those under consideration so that we can start putting them on the books, and especially get the notifications out early enough that people can get those on their calendars and hopefully participate. So again, those can be directly sent to me, and we'll filter through them and put them in a good systematic order and when we think those should be presented going forward, starting in June, or probably more like July now with new topics. I think June is kind of booked with the two we have already and a couple other things we have going on, especially considering that everyone's going to be rapidly complying with these two particular requirements as far as certification and procurement go. Yeah, so with business sectors webinar, we can certainly do that. John, as Lisa mentioned, we have an EO one coming up. We also have a summit that's going to be announced in the next few weeks, or maybe next few days, that's going to occur in October, and some of these specific topics will also be presented at that. We're refining on who the audience is going to be for that, and looking at topics that we will present to that. And once we have that more firm, we'll get that information out as well.
You know, we may want to, depending on the urgency of these topics, we might want to wait until the one-stop certification process has concluded, because we're going to learn a lot from that, including some effective practices that we can share. So that's going to be a source of ideas for the continuous improvement work that we'll tackle in program year 18.
Definitely. We're going to be looking to the state and local boards, CEOs, and staff for input on that summit and developing some of those topics. They're certainly going to be invited to that, and so we want to make sure that we have sessions that directly relates to what they're doing as far as compliance with WLA requirements going forward.
And Renee asked a great question about procurement attestation. She notes that the form, which is due at the end of May, requires that an operator be indicated, and then asks, should we turn in the form indicating their status, or complete it when the local process has been concluded? Turn that one over to my Commerce colleagues.
John, are you still on the phone?
Yeah, I'm on the line. What was the question again? I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, Renee asked, the procurement attestation form, which is due the end of this month, 5/31, requires an operator to be indicated. Should we turn in the form indicating our status or complete when our local process for procuring the operator is complete? And additionally, she asked, if the attestation form indicates a no response, should we provide additional information?
Yeah, I would. I think that if you can provide us with an update by the 15th or before, that would be appreciated. But I think ultimately we would want for our records to show that you went through the process, and to have the completed and signed version, back to us, definitely before June 30. But if you can provide us with an update as to where you are at by May 15th, I think that sounds reasonable. Would you all agree?
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Certainly, if anyone has any best practices they've come along that they'd like to share with anyone as you've handled each of these processes. I went ahead and put the poll back up in case somebody came in late and wasn't able to complete it before we pulled it away. I like to say that we've had a nice mix of individuals from boards and programs and even other. We've had a few people that indicated the others. So we've got a few more minutes here. If you have any other questions or just like to make some comments as to how your process has been going and maybe some recommendations for success that you could make to anyone else. All right, Diana, do you have any final comments before we let everyone go?
No, I just appreciate everyone's tuning into this webinar today. And we realize there's a lot of work going on in addition to the certification process that's keeping you all very busy. We don't want to overload you with requirements, but we will very much be interested in, as Mark was saying, understanding what worked through this process and what needs to be improved and rethought, because we want to capture this information while it's still fresh in your minds. So we'll be reaching out in July to capture those experiences. So just thank you very much. Mark, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I was just trying to respond to one of those. For the timeline, it is one of your slides in here. It's for certification, or you can go to that e-policy link that Chelsea posted earlier and find the certification of one-stop centers, and there's a timeline there. Again, that's a suggested timeline we provided. It's not a compliance-type timeline that you have to meet, other than that July 1 deadline for both procurement and certification. How you reach that is up to you, but we certainly think there's some steps along the way that you should be progressing towards on a particular timeline. So hopefully you'll be able to find that, again, either in this webinar document or in the policy. With that, I appreciate everyone's participation today, and we look forward to you joining our future webinars. Thank you, and thank you again, Diana.
Thank you.